I'm gonna just talk about stuff, probably, for a while. I haven't decided what game I'm gonna play in the background yet, but we'll get to that in a minute. Earlier, I was thinking about power, the nature of power and responsibility. I thought I would continue to discuss that. Over some gameplay. I guess maybe I'll just grind. I'm gonna grind some skins in COD while I discuss this. Power and responsibility. So everyone knows the classic Uncle Ben quote from Spider-Man: "With great power comes great responsibility." It's been beaten to death at this point. And you know, as with most quotes from pop culture or superhero media or anything like that, right? Most people never grasp anything deeper than its surface level meaning. And I realize that sounds conceited. Like, oh, most people are dumber than me. But, most people are just concerned. I would say most people, maybe not statistic. No, I feel like it's got to be at least more than 50% of people never really consider the deeper meaning. Because we've all got other stuff to think about. We're all busy with our lives and our jobs and our relationships and all that stuff, so people don't think about it, and that's fine. It's not their fault. But I've been thinking about it for a long time. And the general sort of basic conception. This game is too loud. I'm gonna need to turn this game down. I can't hear myself think. The general basic conception of the idea that most people have is like, oh yeah, Superman's got power. Not Spider-Man, whoever it is has power in like a real temporal sense, like a physical type of power that it's like I can physically do things that other people cannot. Greater durability, and therefore, I have to use it in a way which is beneficial to others, or that's kind of the way it's presented in the storyline. It's like, well, you've got the special power other people don't have, so you have to use it to help all the other people who are less powerful. And that's true, but I don't think that it quite strikes at the heart of what the phrase can mean and what the relationship is between power and responsibility. So power and responsibility are more accurately viewed as sort of like two sides of the coin, where it's not that with great power you have to make responsible choices in the sense of because a lot of people think responsibility essentially means accountability. It means that you are held to account, right? It is to you that the responsibility is given for your actions. So the relationship there being power is influence. Power is the ability to do things or change things or cause things to happen. And so the reason that power and responsibility are inextricably linked is because you are responsible for the things that you make happen or do not make happen, right? Like, with the ability you have to influence events and outcomes, you are necessarily the person who influenced the events and the outcomes, and therefore those events and outcomes that have been influenced by you are necessarily a responsibility. Like, this is I'm repeating it almost to the point of tautology, right? Like, it goes back to but it's an inherent reality. It's not like it's not something that can be proven or disproven in a certain sense. It's like a base reality. This is a fundamental reality. And I think a lot of people think that by refusing power, they also can refuse responsibility. That's what I was getting at earlier when I was not recording. It was something I was thinking about. And that's kind of where I was trying to get to right now, is that people tend to make this assumption that you can simply refuse power, or not accept power, or not seek power, and therefore have less responsibility and, have less burden. Right? And maybe they don't think consciously. I think a lot of people would tend to be like, no, I'd like to have more power. power, and power can be, you know, a good, but they don't like to use the word power. A lot of people will tend to avoid the word power than power. Power is evil. You know, capital P power. Tyranny. It's like creation. It's power. At least people tend to have an emotional reaction to power. But that's mostly societal conditioning and political stuff, not exactly root human nature. Root human nature is generally to go, okay, I like power. Like, I want to, you know, I want to have the ability to influence more things. Like, you know, this is why everyone fantasizes about having superpowers and being able to mind control, or, you know, whatever your superpower of choice may be. You know, people always kind of gravitate towards that. And this is also self-evident, right? Everyone, you know, every rational person can just sort of recognize that this is the case. People do tend towards wanting power. But I think many people in the world today are also scared of having power, especially rational people. People who are both rational and morally good, maybe well-meaning people, sometimes will try to remove themselves from power, or stay away from power out of a false sense of morality. That they feel like, oh, well, you know, power corrupts people, you know, get power and they do evil things with it, therefore I should avoid having power so that I don't get corrupted. And this is kind of like spurred on by that old phrase, like, you know, power corrupts, and, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely, etc., right? The corruption of power. And I don't think that old phrase is true. This is one that it's like, okay, that's a cool phrase and all, but it doesn't seem to be self-evidently true, right? Because if you look at, well, who's the example of power? What is the most powerful being which exists? And that being is, of course, God. And
I've been 6 years in the career.
Right, is ultimately good. Right? He's all-powerful and also omnibenevolent, right? He has all of the power which it is possible for him to have, and he also is all good. So, it actually would suggest, pattern would suggest that power is not a bad thing. Could be really a good thing, but at the very least, power is a morally neutral thing. Power in and of itself does not have positive or negative moral value. It's just, you know, a state of being, like gravity. It's just sort of a statement of factual reality. Where was I going with this? I think that the example that came to mind that I was most prominently thinking about of people rejecting power, generally good-natured people too, though maybe naive or irresponsible, but good-natured people, tend to reject their ability and right to carry weapons, right? This is something, weapons are one of the clearest symbols of power, right? Beyond, I think in our society now, like, superpowers are like the symbol of media. But, you know, weapons are, in reality, one of the best analogs for power and the true nature of power, because it is just raw physical power, right? Like, the ability to use any sort of weapon, right, to harm other people, or even just to scare them into thinking that you, like, the fact that they know that you can harm them, right? That's power. But a lot of people choose not to carry a firearm, or, you know, a knife, or, you know, there's all sorts of weapons you can carry. My personal choice, I would argue, a firearm is the best of the options available to you. But, you know, many people will neglect to choose that option, and even more, or actually it's less. Many people reject to carry any weapon at all, and even more reject to carry the best weapon, right? And, you know, a lot of them have different rationalizations. People are like, well, I just don't want to live in fear, or I just, you know, like these stupid rationalizations that, I mean, we could say this constantly, many people are so missing things, right? But these people, they do not recognize the fact that just because they don't choose to wield power doesn't mean they're not responsible for the consequences of that power. And what I mean by this is that if you choose to wield power, it's clear what the results are, right? If I choose to wield a weapon, right, whatever happens to or with or because of that weapon is my fault, ultimately, and my responsibility, right? So if I choose to carry a gun, but I'm stupid about it, and I accidentally shoot somebody, well, that's my responsibility. Like, that's my bad. I'm going to jail for manslaughter. I wielded the power improperly or irresponsibly, and it resulted in an undesirable outcome. But even when you wield power for good, and it has desirable outcomes, like, for example, I carry a gun and then I use it to, like, stop a mass shooter or something, right? Then you're also responsible for the good thing which happened, right? Then you get the credit, sort of, like, being like, well, you put in the training and you were safe and you were aware and you had the gun, so you're the hero, right? So that's sort of responsibility on both sides, right? And, people think, that's basic. I think we both kind of, not both, any side of this argument or any person who might rationally consider this would agree that what I just said is fundamentally true. The part that, is where it gets hairy is like, okay, but what if I reject to have the firearm, right? If I just go, no, I'm not going to carry that, for whatever my reason may be, well, now I'm absolved of responsibility. I can't be held responsible for accidentally shooting someone, because I'm not going to accidentally shoot someone until I have a gun, right? But yes, that's true, you're not responsible for that, but you are responsible for the, opportunity cost, right? Which is all of the things, bad things which might happen because you do not have one, right? You're actually responsible for it, in a sort of way. And it's kind of harsh to hear, I think it would be, to someone who holds this belief. And I recognize that what I'm talking about here is kind of a strong one. Like, I don't have, that's kind of all you can work with, and I'm going to try to be as fair to this position as possible, because it's not one I've heard, truly expressed by anyone, but it's one that I feel is implied by certain choices. Anywho, if your position is, implicitly or explicitly, is that, that if you were to, if you just choose not to wield the power, right, to wield the weapon, in this, example, in this, what's the word? The analogy, right? The weapon is the analogy to power at large. And then if I choose not to wield power, then I'm not responsible for the power, because I don't have it. But you are still responsible for everything that happens as a consequence of you not wielding power. Because the opportunity exists, and I think that your level of responsibility is also commensurate with the level of ease with which you might get that power. Right? So if the power's right there, if it's simple, for someone like me, if I already have taken the step to own a gun and I have a carry permit and all this stuff, right? And I just choose, say, not to bring it with me on a particular day, right? I just leave it at home in the safe or whatever. I'm very responsible for anything that might happen on that day that I could have prevented, anything bad that might happen as a consequence of me not having it, right? Because it was literally a simple decision of do I grab it or do I not. Right? So the power was right in front of me and I rejected that power, and therefore, I'm very responsible. But if there's more separation between you and actually wielding that power, I think there's a relationship of lesser responsibility. Like, for example, if you live somewhere where it's like a really big legal risk to have a gun. If you live in Britain or something, right? You live in England or I think most of Europe is that way. If you live in any one of those countries, you have a large barrier of entry to wielding that power, and many risks and negative consequences of doing that, right? Which puts you at a different thing where it's like, okay, that's the expectation is not for you to carry a weapon because, it's a different calculation, right? But then it's like, okay, here in the United States, if you're just a normal person who lives in a normal state with like, laws, or what we consider here in the States.
Worried. Not even for a second.
Then the difference between you and like having that power is pretty much some money and some paperwork, right? Depending on the state, some states require like real training certification. Frankly, I think that the training part is also a big part of it, like of responsibility, but not of power, right? Like your choice to accept the power is just, in most places, just paperwork and money. But your choice to be responsible with that power, right? To treat that power adequately with the correct level of care and precaution, requires training. But what am I getting at? Is that the average person, right, in this situation I'm describing in the States, has a moderate barrier of entry between them being as they are and them having this additional power. But it's not a significant barrier to entry. Like, it's not that much extra for most people to spend a couple $100, and do some time, some research, and some paperwork. It's not that big of a deal for most people. So that's something to consider, that they're still mostly responsible for whatever it is that happens as a result of them not wielding power. And I wish that I had a structure for this thought that was, like, better, right? But this is, that's pretty much the point that I'm trying to get at, is that people, you're responsible for what happens as a result of you wielding or not wielding power. Like, the way that you treat power is ultimately you are held to account. And so I think that this theory, I think you can expand this more broadly and say, okay, it's not just weapons, but it's like any opportunity you have for your voice to be heard, for your influence to be felt, right, for decisions to be made by you, and opportunities for you to gain greater power and greater decision making in the future, right? When you see those opportunities and you shy away or you avoid them, you're responsible for the opportunity cost of that, and that's as simple as, like, if you're in a group setting and something's being talked about and you feel like you have an idea that could be valuable to share and you choose not to share it, you just ceded your power, right? Because words have power, ideas have power, thoughts have power. So, if you speak your ideas and your thoughts to other people, they may hear them and be influenced by them, and et cetera, et cetera. There's a certain power factor there. And, accepting responsibility for that is obviously somewhat important, right? Even though there's not a huge amount of responsibility to be had for that specific, it's like, well, I just said some ideas. That doesn't mean that, like, I'm responsible for other people acting on those ideas. You're a little bit responsible, right? You're responsible, if you are out there spouting these bad ideas and morally negative or logically incorrect things, you are, to a point responsible for the results of that misinformation or that evil doing. But, aside from that, if you are choosing not to speak for fear of that, that's the thing, is it's like you've got to weigh, how well do I know what I have to say is actually good, right? How well can I predict what the outcomes of me saying this might be at large, right? And then weigh that against what would be the outcomes of not saying it and keeping your mouth shut. And then also saying something else. There's a lot of options here for that. But I think a lot of people with more agreeable temperaments or more just general shyness tend to avoid speaking up. They may have a lot of good ideas and they just don't want to share. I think we all do. I definitely do that. Everyone does it to different degrees. But, you've got to consider that when you make that choice, any value that might have been provided to other people or to the world at large by the idea which you could have shared, is not going to be had. And you're actually responsible for that absence now. You're responsible for the lack of good that was put into the world by you not saying anything. Responsibility is huge, though. I think, thinking about this stuff is really important, especially for men. Ladies, you can do what you want. I'm not gonna tell you what to do. It's not my area of expertise yet, but with men out there, responsibility is good. We need to really focus on personal responsibility. I've been thinking about that as a theory of masculinity in general. Is that, masculinity is, I would say, almost primarily defined by responsibility. Is that as a man, as your transition from boyhood to manhood, right, is primarily defined by the amount of responsibility you take or accept, right? And taking and accept, I differentiate those two words because they are different things, right? So to accept responsibility is, to be okay with whatever responsibility is put upon you by outside factors, right? But I think that to take responsibility is to be in the active mindset of looking for things to be responsible for, finding ways to be more responsible, and not be more responsible as in make better decisions. Once again, I mean like to recognize your own role of agency and your own accountability, right? So to take a greater role in the number of things for which you might be held accountable. Even though most people will never hold you accountable, outside sources will not be holding you nearly as accountable as you could be. It's about what are you holding yourself accountable for? What accounting do you make of your own responsibilities? How many responsibilities do you count in your list of things for which you are responsible? And I think that increasing the length of that list is sort of the primary objective of growing up as a man and being more masculine and more mature, is just making that list longer. And it's not, I think a lot of people will agree with me to the point that it's about accepting that, right? It's like, oh, well, as you get older, you just have to accept that you're responsible for feeding yourself and paying your bills, you have a family, all that stuff, right? But that's all contingent upon outside factors. That's all people say, well, I have to accept the responsibilities which I necessarily have. And I think there's a difference between the necessary responsibilities, the things which are, sort of widely agreed upon foundationally, like, yes, you are absolutely responsible for that, and you must accept that, versus, because that's like good, it's kind of a good, better, best thing, right? Which is that, there's bad, which is obviously people who refuse to accept responsibility for things which are basic. Excuse me. And then sort of the good side of that is accepting responsibility for those basic responsibilities. Like, yes, I'm responsible for the consequences of my actions. I'm responsible for my own well-being and safety, like basic kind of stuff. But the next level, the better version of that, is to accept responsibility for things that are not like just your responsibility, things that you could easily put on other people. Like if you have a family and your kids are acting up, or your wife is cheating on you, or things that are bad and that certainly involve other people's agency. Like other people are responsible for that, right? Like your kids are responsible when they choose to disobey you or to go do bad things, and your wife certainly is responsible if she cheats on you. But they are accountable to those things. But I think the next level of that is accepting personal responsibility for things that are not just personal. Going like, oh, I'm responsible, at least in part, for these things that other people are doing. So like if you're a man and you're the head of your household, you're actually responsible for all of the things that go on. Right? And that's the type of responsibility that would be unfair to voice the responsibility. It would be unfair for me to walk into your house and tell you, hey, you're responsible for the fact that you're taking my green things and that your life left you. That would be unfair. It would be wrong of me to come into your house and tell you that. But it would be right of you to accept it on your own. You know what I mean? It's kind of complicated, I guess, the way I'm trying to put it. I'm not sure if I'm getting it across properly, but that's kind of the core of it, is that, oh, gosh, I'm tired, is that there's sort of a level of responsibility which is appropriate to place upon other people, but then there's a much higher level, which is, which you can essentially enforce upon yourself. That you can go, hey, I'm responsible for more than this, but you couldn't reasonably do that level to another person. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest sort of differences. That's that next level between being a man and being a good man and being a great man, right? Is that you are, you're not just doing the bare minimum of being responsible. You are, you're accepting ultimate responsibility, ultimate accountability for all these sorts of different things. And a lot of people are like, oh man, that's not fair though. Why should I be responsible for all these things that are outside of my control? It's like, well, for one, they're not entirely outside of your control. They may be partially outside of your control. But I would argue that there's a bunch of things that are partially outside your control that you still would normally be expected to take responsibility for, like your own well-being, right? Like, whether you can feed yourself. That's partially outside your control. Like, there's a bunch of stuff that could happen that are out of your control, as far as, getting fired, getting different layoffs from your job so you can't afford food, or, different crazy accidents, or other things like that that affect your health or your ability to work or survive for yourself. Those things are possibilities, and so you go, well, these are outlier cases, so, therefore in these cases you're not responsible. And it's like, sure, but in the concept at large, you're still responsible. Or just because there are parts of it which you are not responsible for doesn't mean you still are not responsible. And so then you just kind of flip the percentages, which is like, okay, if there's a 1% case where you're not responsible, but 99% where you are, then that's, everyone's cool with you going, oh, well, yeah, that's your responsibility. But, flip it on its head and go, well, what are the 1% cases? What are the cases where I'm 99% responsible? Right? And you're looking for that 1% and accepting it, or not accepting it, but taking it, right? Going, that's responsibility out there floating in the ether, unclaimed. Because people at large don't like to take responsibility for things. People try to avoid it, most people. And that's normal. Like, we all want to avoid it because it's uncomfortable to take responsibility for things. It's a burden, right? But that means there's so much responsibility out there that's unclaimed. That there's all sorts of things that happen and outcomes which occur that one can be responsible for, Like, when you're in a group setting that maybe the conversation devolves into an argument or just some conversation that you're not supposed to be in, everyone's culpable for that. Everyone in that conversation is at fault in the wrong for that happening and can be held to account or could be found responsible for that outcome. But most of them don't want to accept that responsibility. And so to be the man, right, to be the bigger person, to say, but like the man up, is to be the first one to go, hey, my bad. Like, I shouldn't have let the conversation go there. I shouldn't have let that happen. Even if your part of it, even if you feel like your part of it wasn't as big as some other people's parts of it were, you can be the first one. You can be the guy that stands up and goes, hey, that's my bad, I'm sorry. And that's that next level accountability, that's that next level masculinity that really separates the boys from the men, And it's something that I'm, definitely not good at, I don't speak from a place of authority here, as one who knows these things from experience, but it's just from observation, and definitely knowing the other side of it, definitely knowing it's not. And and I can view the examples and the different evidences and ideas which exist. And, and this is the ideal which I myself am aspiring towards, but I'm nowhere near achieving, right? That's the kind of the caveat here, right? Yeah, I don't claim to speak as one who's like, I'm not some guru who's perfect at all these things, and I'm not even very good at these things. But I am just recognizing that they're good and desirable, noble goals to have, which I'm working towards and that other people should be working towards as well, as the ideal. But, yeah, that's kind of my spiel on responsibility, but responsibility is huge. Like, responsibility, accountability, I use them somewhat interchangeably, the words, but they have such similar meaning that it's, I think it adequately conveys what I'm trying to convey. Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's really all I have. I can think of some more stuff to talk about, but it's probably just the most I have on this episode. I mean, yeah, and then power. Back to power. It's just, it's just power. Like, and I think there is a legitimate question to be had about goodness, right? You do have to have an honest appraisal of your own goodness in order to determine whether or not you should be paid for power. Right? Because power, I think, when people say that power corrupts, I think that really what they're saying is that power amplifies. Whatever you are, whatever exists within you, is whatever will come out when you have power, right? And, so it amplifies the nature which is already within you, or the tendencies which are already, are built up inside of you. And so that's why power corrupts men who are corrupt, right? Men who are internally corrupt, or morally corrupt, evil, on a certain sense. Now, evil's a strong word, but it exists along the same spectrum of corruptness, right? From sort of, slightly immoral to, like, evil, right? But, I mean, evil is evil no matter what degree. It's just that word tends to nowadays only be used tied to it. Whereas there's loads of evil, too. It's just bad, right? But bad has become such a weak word that, it's hard to adequately express what I'm talking about, which is just the concept of, like, the essence of the moral negativity. Like, the moral negative, as a concept, right? And I usually use the word evil to describe that concept, which doesn't mean that it has to be like this totally, like, absolute, like, cartoon villain evil, right? But it's just anything which is in opposition to good, in a great or small degree, is evil. And I think an understanding of your own nature is necessary when considering when to wield power, because if you have an honest consideration of yourself, you will be able to notice what your nature is. Like where am I evil? Where is the evil within me? What parts of me are being controlled by what desires and what motives, right? Are those good or are those evil? And what have been the results of that too? But the results of that tend to be brought about by power, right? Because it's like you have the power to act, to make decisions, to do whatever, and that results in outcomes. And those outcomes are kind of the thing by which you judge what happened in, like, hindsight. Like, the hindsight look of it is, oh, well, what were the outcomes? The outcomes were bad, therefore the inputs must necessarily have been bad. And that's the old, like, trees and the fruit parable, right? Like, that's Jesus talking. Is that good trees only bear good fruit, bad trees only bear bad fruit, right? And so you can know the type of tree based on the type of fruit. And it's, evil and good, right? These are obviously very polarizing, but it is, that's necessary. The polarization is necessary because that's the nature, that's the truth, that's the reality. But, if you wanted to water down that metaphor a little bit, you could say, an apple, if you see an apple growing in a tree, it's an apple tree, right? It's the same thing. Apples and bananas, right? You see bananas hanging off a tree, you know that is a banana tree. Because apple trees don't grow bananas. That's just not how that works. And so the same is true of this. And so, understanding your own nature is, a cycle of sort of self appraisal and going, look, what do I think's going on within me right now, and what are my motives and all that stuff, and then acting, right, which is the part of wielding power, of taking power, or of using the power which you already possess,
I know it's a
right?
big change, but
And then looking
you'll
at the
get used to
results of that action and saying, well, were these good or bad? And obviously there's a nuance of why they're good or bad is obviously to be considered, because sometimes the good and bad are misinterpretable, right? Like, you can misinterpret them, but that's another skill to work on, is your personal ability to interpret the difference between good and evil, to discern between the two. Because the better you are discerning between the two, the better you can know yourself, and the better you can judge your own actions and intentions. So it's kind of a whole big plan, all part of the same goal, right? But if you, judge your intentions, and you go, hey, I think maybe my intentions aren't the best, then yeah, maybe don't act, maybe don't wield power. Like, that's a time when it's valid to make that decision, because you're like, well, the opportunity cost of me not wielding the power outweighs the direct negative outcome of me wielding it, right? So but even that choice in itself is coming from a place of goodness. Because if you're purely evil, if you're purely just, you had no goodness left in you, you're purely corrupt, then you wouldn't have to, you wouldn't make that decision not to wield power. You just absolutely wield power and use it for evil. But, evil, that's the thing, is that weakness degrades good, but rarely affects evil, right? Is that it's like, well, because we'll talk about good, is that good, if you are a good person, or you determine your intentions to be good and your heart to be noble and all that stuff, right? And that's kind of the general, nobody's all good or all evil, but, if you're determined that you're like, okay, I'm mostly like in the right here, I'm on the up and up, and, you may just have, weakness is kind of a piece of evil, right? Weakness is an aspect of evil. It is not a good aspect, it is a negative one, not positive, right? And so one negative aspect you might have, a piece of evil, like a part of you, is weakness. And so you might be weak and cowardly, right? You might be afraid of being powerful, and that will stop you from being good. Whereas if you can remove that weakness from yourself, or you can face that fear, and you can be brave, right, which is a noble attribute of good, right? Then you will be able to wield that power and do good with it, right? And whether that's like, some grandiose, wielding of power. I know that the words I'm using sound very highbrow, very like, oh, wield the power, right? But that can be as simple as just making decisions, right? That can be just simply acting as an agent within your own life or your own environment. And that's kind of that's like the power that you have every day, is to choose what to do, what to say, where to go, like just the basic things that you have those options every day. And making those decisions, you want to be informed by a knowledge of your own good and evil. And I think intentions have a huge bit to do with that. It's hugely intentional what your, your outcomes are going to be based largely on your intentions. Not necessarily that your outcomes will be the same as what you intend for them to be. Let's be clear there. If you intend for something to happen, that does not mean that it will happen. That's like manifesting or whatever. It's like some spiritualist nonsense. But the moral quality of the outcomes which proceed from your actions will be oftentimes largely preceded by the moral quality of the intention for the action, right? So if you do something out of a purely selfish intention, right, which tends to be negative, like if your intention is purely like, I just want to help myself out and get ahead, right, then that may not happen, or that may happen, but whether or not that thing actually happens, what will happen will be broadly negative on a moral scale, right? Is that, well, you may selfishly get yourself ahead, but you will in doing so put others behind, or do some sort of spiritual harm to yourself, or, you know, any other combination of negative outcomes which proceed from that. Or alternatively, you may simply fail, and have a bunch of, you know, negative consequences from that. So both are totally possible in the realm of what happens, but it's that those negative outcomes happen as a result of negative intention, right? And that's not always true, because, you know, it's not always 100% either one way or the other. Because what happens is, obviously, life's complicated, and decisions are complicated, and actions and reactions, it's all very complicated, right? But, you know, oftentimes you can make a decision or a move which has multivariate consequences. Some consequences that are morally good, some that are not, just sort of mixed up together. And that's one of those things to think about too, is that your confirmation bias can often take your focus away from the negative consequences to your actions and towards the positive ones, or vice versa, just depending on how you're being affected. But it can take you away from the truth, is what I'm trying to say, is that you can unintentionally, like, you could do something bad intentioned, but have a bunch of different consequences to it, and then have your attention directed primarily to the good consequences of it, and going, oh, well, you know, maybe my intentions weren't that bad in the first place, or whatever, like, because there was a good bunch of good stuff that happened, right? And you may ignore the bad things which happened. And at the same time, you may have noble intentions and make good decisions that may yield many good consequences, either immediately or oftentimes in the future. Like, the good consequences tend to be less immediate than the bad ones in many of these situations. And so you may notice these good, or you may have had good intentions, and there may be good outcomes which are invisible to you, or which are yet to come, but your attention may be directed primarily towards all of the bad outcomes and all of the negative things which are happening as a result of your nobly intended action. And that's something to be aware of too, is that you have to center yourself on knowing yourself and knowing your intentions and knowing your sort of moral alignment, and looking for the things which are in accordance with that, and having faith too. Faith is huge. Having faith for, like, the good results which are yet to come, or the good results which are unseen. It's like, you know what, I know I did the right thing, and even if the outcomes of that are not apparent to me, I know, I have a sure hope that they are out there somewhere, either in the future or in ways which are not visible to me in the present. But that's wow, I don't know how I got on this. I'm like on a crazy tangent right now, but whatever, that's the whole fun. That's the whole point, you know, just getting on tangents, talking about random stuff. Man, it's been 45 minutes already. Can't believe I passed so much time. Hey, either way, it's been good. I'll probably cut it here. 45 minutes is a great amount of time to just talk about something. So, you know, can't really complain about that. But yeah, for anyone who ever watches this, thanks for watching and listening to my, you know, whatever this was. I hope you got something out of it.
If you did,
Let me know. Anywho, good night.